Hello and welcome to the programme bringing together leading British commentators with foreign correspondents who write, blog, podcast and broadcast from the Dateline London. This week, British Conservative MPs completed their colleague cull in the hunt for their new leader and this country's next Prime Minister. Have they also culled the economic consensus within which governments of left and right have operated for at least the last 20 years? And as the world waits for Vladimir Putin to allow safe passage of Ukraine's grain, why Putin was himself kept waiting. In the studio with me, Ashish Ray, Indian writer and cricket commentator since the 1970s. Michael Goldfarb, actor turned journalist, foreign correspondent for PBS Radio in the United States, now host of the podcast, The First Rough Drafter's History. And Steve Richards, who began his career as a Westminster correspondent just as Margaret Thatcher was ending hers. Coincidental. His blog is called Rock and Roll Politics, his most recent book about the talented politicians who failed to make it to number 10. Steve, we'll leave the question unanswered of which of the current two might be that person in any future edition of the book. What do you make of the choice that Tory MPs have presented party members with between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak?
I think it's extraordinary because in a very erratic way, with both Theresa May and Boris Johnson, you could see attempts, chaotic in Johnson's case, distracted in May's case with Brexit, attempts to move on from Thatcherism. You know, Theresa May talked about the good that government can do and the state can do. Boris Johnson occasionally put the case for high public spending. Now you've got a battle with two people claiming the Thatcherite mantle in very different ways. So it's a battle on the right of the Tory party. The focus is on tax cuts. You know, when is the debate, but not should there be them. There's no focus on the role of the state, as demands on the state are growing. And so it's a return to that sort of 1980s Thatcherism that very erratically the Tory party have been trying to move away from. Thatcherism, incidentally, absolutely a product of its time, the late 70s and early 80s, not the situation we're in now. But she casts a spell over its membership and these two candidates. And it is a very narrow contest in that respect.
Ashish, I mean, you were reporting from London when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. As Steve rightly says, circumstances are different, but the debate is very much, it seems, over not just taxation, and the fact we've got the highest tax burden since the early 1950s under Rishi Sunak's chancellorship. So that's an obvious ground for Liz Truss to attack him on. But she also seems to be attacking what she calls the consensus of economic policy that's lasted for 20 years. That's arguably quite a radical position to adopt.
Yes, because Britain had moved somewhat towards the centre in terms of economic policy, and therefore that's something that she is trying to yank out, it would appear, or at least that might be her attempt. Whether that's the sensible thing to do, I don't know, for the simple reason that people seem to think that Rishi Sunak's approach, which is of trying to reduce the state debt before lowering taxes, seems...
You said on Friday that any tax rises would probably not be before at least the end of next year.
Yes, except that, you know, he won't give tax cuts straight away because he needs to recover the money that has been spent and therefore the government debt has grown exponentially. That said, I think people, although they think that that may be the more responsible, more sensible thing to do, but clearly the populist line is cut taxes now. And that seems to be playing out, as of now, reasonably well with the membership, the rank and file of the Conservative Party.
I want to push back a bit about this Margaret Thatcher was the past thing. I think we're still playing out the drama of her defenestration. I think that, you know, if you look at what Brexit is a direct product of, I mean, I was a journalist here in the late 80s and early 90s as well. I mean, Europe was the issue that split the Conservative Party apart, and the anti-Europeans, and she was their figurehead, have never forgiven her. In fact, UKIP was formed by Conservative politicians who thought John Major wasn't being a good Thatcherite. We still have this obeisance. I mean, I tweeted last week, wouldn't it be simpler to simply have a seance? Get all the Conservative Party around, summon the spirit of Margaret Thatcher, you can have a nice discussion, but can we actually be legislating for the 21st century? I'm not sure they really are there. And you know, you look
No, you're right, they're not. And she still cast a spell, and the Conservative Party changed with her leadership. It became much more ideological. And so you're absolutely right. But you do every now and again see kind of, as I say, very erratic attempts to move on and address the demands of now rather than the demands of 79. But she's there absolutely at the heart of
other
this
things
contest.
have changed as well. I mean, I think
things have changed.
The Conservative press has become much more hardline and much less interested, frankly, in journalism. And now it's all opinion all the time. Because just talking about Rishi Sunak, right? So I can remember many a time where the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail would be talking about a chancellor like Rishi Sunak, there would have been Ken Clark, you know, putting up taxes now so he could have a big tax-cutting budget 6 months before the next general election. The Conservatives would win, and they could just roll over their mandate. That's sort of what Rishi Sunak is proposing, isn't he?
He is.
But that's good politics. Isn't it?
Well, hold on though. You see, it's a topsy-turvy contest. He is the Thatcherite. She used to go around saying, you know, you've got to balance the books. My father owned his shop in Grantham, never spent more than he earned, and so on. And that's basically what he's saying. But he is being attacked by those who regard themselves as the committed Thatcherites, Jacob Rees-Mogg and people like that, as a socialist, even though he is actually being the balance the books, don't cut taxes until you can pay for them. Now, he might be wrong about all these things, but it's the Thatcherite view. Liz Truss, is more stuck in that sort of Reaganite view, that you borrow to cut taxes, and debt and deficit really doesn't matter that much. Let it rip, and we can pay back over many decades. So that's where they are, but that's not really how the party sees them. Which is curious.
Rishi Sunak has definitely declared himself to be a Thatcherite economist, if you like. Whereas officially Liz Truss hasn't. But where I think Liz Truss has played the popular line is by saying that I'm going to cut taxes now. And the other thing, of course, is about her ideological inconsistency over a long period of time. She moved from the Lib Dems to the liberal wing, if you like, of the
small L
Conservative.
liberal, yes.
Yes.
Socially liberal.
Correct, of the Conservative Party.
This is
and
David
now
Cameron was
her latest position seems to be rather to the right. So she's moved quite a lot, and therefore appears to be a little flaky in her position.
Isn't this sort of a bit like, though, what happens in primaries in the US? You tack to the activists, you win with the activists, and then you slowly move towards a slightly broader position, which allows you to bring in more voters.
Yeah, except that you don't have to bring in more voters in this particular context. It's one of the small joys of living in a one-party state. I mean, if you can't get it right the first time, you know, David Cameron or then Theresa May or then Boris Johnson, I mean, Cameron and Johnson are big enough personalities for the job, and Theresa May was
not really a one-party state.
You know, I mean, this is no, I know it's
You're
not,
being joking.
but I mean, it just feels like it. It's like you know,
But
the
this is-
BBC.
well,
I don't.
This is the third Conservative Prime Minister
but that's
to be
the really
selected
interesting-
alone by the party
But
membership.
isn't
And the rest of the electorate is excluded at this juncture.
But just as it was when Tony Blair was replaced by Gordon Brown. I mean, it is the
Indeed.
nature
That
of our
happened
political
once,
system.
but this has now happened
but that's because they
three
lost
times.
the subsequent
And also-
election.
in a quite compressed space. I mean, you know, we learned, right, wasn't the story that Blair and Brown had a pact? And after the third electoral victory, maybe Blair regretted having made that pact. But anyway, you know, he honored it. But this is something entirely different. I have to say, Sean, it feels frankly wrong that you can, in 7 years, so compress it and lose control of your own party, much less run a country.
It's very interesting, Sean, that you mentioned the last time this happened under a Labour government, Gordon Brown almost insisted there were no other candidates. And it looked very odd. It was just him. Yes. But you can see now why he did it. It's really dangerous for a governing party when the door is opened on what happens behind the scenes. And we've had moments in public TV debates where Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are arguing over fundamental tax policy in a way that breaks the spell about cabinet unity, and it's very hard once the spell is broken
to put the genie back in the bottle.
To put the genie back in the bottle. So there will be many consequences
not
arising.
a good sign in terms of stability.
Right.
It's revolving door prime ministers. This is not really the history of the Conservative Party. And what he referred to quite rightly is that Gordon Brown's turn came after a decade. So it wasn't really immediate. It wasn't something which happened in quick succession.
Let's talk a bit about what these two may or may not mean for the rest of the world, insofar as Britain matters in the rest of the world. Just on this question of Liz Truss's kind of positioning on the economics, there will be a lot of places around the world, and I suspect the United States would be one of them, where her critique of the way the global economy has operated over the last 20 years will resonate, not least over the impact of globalisation. A lot of people have been failed by the process of globalisation. Could she actually be quite a useful figure internationally in that regard?
At the moment in the US, I don't think anyone is paying attention to that.
Sure.
I mean, one of the things, and I know we're going to come on to these later in the program, is the pivot towards China and wondering how to play China and anticipate the next 20 to 30 years really does preoccupy everybody in Washington, so far as I can tell. Plus, there is our own internal problems. I mean, this past week, the January 6th committee, is wrapped up its summer hearings. People are just having to deal with the fact that the U.S. is both looking out towards China, but internally our politics are such a mess. The society is such a mess. I honestly don't think that what any British Prime Minister, even if Boris Johnson says, hold America close, hasta la vista, baby,
was his farewell message in the House of Commons.
That message is out there, and I think it's a reminder that maybe he was saying, no matter what's happening domestically in America, don't lose sight of it. I don't think whoever emerges from this is going to make a difference.
On that, at least, just on the China question, Liz Truss has talked the talk, hasn't she? I mean, she said, for example, we'll be there if China invades Taiwan, the British will be there supporting Taiwan.
She has this impulsive streak, which is quite dangerous. If you remember at the beginning, when the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, she gave an interview where she said, if ordinary people want to go out there and fight, that's fine as far as she's concerned. She had to be immediately disowned by the Defence Secretary, within minutes. And likewise, a rather sort of alarming prospect that, Britain could get involved in some sort of military operation against China. I mean, this is kind of... Now, she was interviewed the other day about Russia and whether she would consider some sort of deeper military operation against Russia, and she said no, without hesitation. It would continue with the current policy. But she is impulsive, and that is potentially quite dangerous in the current unstable situation globally.
Actually, we know about Rishi Sunak's family connections to India, and obviously for the diaspora he's an interesting figure, but what could he mean, what might he mean to the rest of the world? I mean, the obvious place is our nearest neighbour to Europe. I mean, is he likely to take a more perhaps collaborative approach to the European Union?
Before I answer that, let me just say that Liz Truss's record as a minister has been quite unremarkable. But that said, as far as India is concerned, I think there's great excitement about this leadership contest. It's all over media in India. It's on television, it's on newspapers, it's playing out in a very big way. Of course, people are a little too exuberant and they didn't quite understand the two-stage process.
Yes.
And therefore, Rishi Sunak taking the lead with the balloting
MPs,
by MPs.
They assumed that was it.
Created enormous excitement. But then suddenly reality has dawned, and I saw a piece by one of the wire services. By the way, what I've been writing from here has been a minority view, because I've been trying to explain this for the last 2 weeks, that this is a two-stage process. But nobody listens. Who cares? And now I found that one of the wire services has said that the prospect doesn't look very good when it comes to the membership stage of the balloting. So that, I think, has created a bit of a pause, but there's still a bit of excitement, residual excitement. It hasn't gone away.
Now, one thing we should all be getting excited about, arguably, is this deal that was agreed finally on Friday, Michael, between, not directly between Ukraine and Russia, but between Ukraine and Turkey, and Russia and Turkey and the UN, to at least allow grain exports to happen again. I mean, this is hugely significant if it happens. What do you make of it?
Well, I think, first of all, it's been in the works for quite a while. And I think that the process, as we'll learn more about it because there'll be a lot of diplomatic reporting, is that it shows how, complicated and fragmented that part of the world, this Central Asia, this Caspian Sea, the Caspian world is. I mean, Russia and Iran. Russia and Iran have been, they've been helping to basically destroy Syria in support of Bashar al-Assad for more than a decade now. And Turkey, which borders Syria and borders Iran, is almost like our representative, and it's incredibly complicated. So this deal was confirmed when Vladimir Putin went to Tehran last week. Fine. What else was discussed? Well, can Turkey have another incursion into northern Syria to protect its interests in that part of the country which is in the hands of the Kurds, and maybe throw some bombs into Iraqi Kurdistan? 8-9 people were killed in Zakho at a resort this week when the Turks bombed it. What leverage does the United States have in any of this? None, because geography is destiny. These are neighbors, and they work together, and they can be utilized to come up with a deal like this, brokered with the UN and Erdogan.
We talked last week on this programme about Joe Biden's visit to the Middle East and whether or not it would yield anything, and the nervousness in Washington about relations between Iran, the influence of Iran in the region rather, and why that would be a reason for perhaps kind of holding his nose and doing his fist with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince there, notwithstanding what he'd said before about him and about Saudi Arabia. And that's the realpolitik. And again, Turkey, presumably, Turkey's part of NATO, so arguably it's part of the military operation in defence of Ukraine against Russia. Does that make Washington nervous?
Turkey, it doesn't want to say, good. You have to be careful about how you speak about Erdogan, but he is kind of indispensable, and he's also infuriating to Washington, to London, to the rest of the NATO partnership. And this has been the case. Look, if you go back to 2003, when the U.S. wanted to invade Iraq, 2 prongs. One from the south, one from the north through Turkey, and Erdogan said, no, you can't do it. But we're NATO, all of those, you can't do it. And it's been like this now for almost 20 years, but he is kind of indispensable. And the thing is, I come back to, I'll finish a second. Just come back to that point I was making earlier about what Americans are thinking about anyway. Yes, Washington was full of, what's he going to, he's going to fist bump MBS, and what about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi? Well, something, it was called humanitarian interventionism for a reason, because in the 15 years when America was the sole superpower, you could think about humanitarian, human rights stuff. It's not the world we live in now.
This leveraging of Erdogan's influence is fascinating. We saw it over the migrant deal to take pressure off Europe with a number of migrants who were coming through Turkey, and Turkey acted against that, but it extracted a price. Presumably, it will extract a political price from this deal.
Presumably. I think what's most interesting, while we were waiting to come on, I don't know whether you heard it, Sean, there was an interview where Ola Guerin was interviewing one of the agents of the deal. and I think it was somebody from NATO, and she was making the point, look, Russia benefits considerably from this deal.
It was the UN Secretary General.
That's who it was, yeah, sorry, we were just literally waiting to come in. And he said, but we need the grain, basically. The poorer countries,
and the world needs the grain,
or else there will be appalling
fifth largest
famine.
Exporter of grain.
And you can, exactly, and so you can see how this leverage plays out in lots of different ways as this, what seems to be, anyway, for now, the war of attrition in Ukraine. And I wonder whether it will extend at some point to energy. How long can the German economy survive, even in this current sort of juncture of not knowing where its energy supplies are going to come from? And I think that is interesting, that from the sort of hard line everyone was taking at the beginning, including Turkey actually, it is now, well, hold on, we need the grain. And I think that kind of signals a kind of shift, really.
I see this as very good news on paper. It remains to be seen whether it's good news in practice. And that said, I think the role of the United Nations also should not be underestimated in brokering this deal. Obviously, Turkey, which has a sort of blow hot, blow cold relationship with Russia, has played a constructive role. At the end of it, the two guarantors, if you like, are the United Nations and Turkey, because there's no direct deal, no direct agreement between Russia and Ukraine. So you've got Turkey and the United Nations.
In any way, a preparation for a peace deal, is it?
Well, this is only a small beginning, and I think one has to go a long way before anything concrete can happen. But at the end of the day, it means that the Russian blockade of Ukrainian ports will be suspended as far as grain exports are concerned, but then the boats will be monitored by Turkey to ensure that just food and nothing else is coming out, and no weapons are going in.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the deal for the moment. As I said, the proof of the pudding will be in the actual practice of the deal.
Michael, do you think in part this may have come about because some of those countries that had not objected to Russia's actions in Ukraine and maintained friendly relations with Russia were starting to be hurt by the grain shortage? Do you think perhaps in some ways Russia may have come under some pressure?
You're talking about places like Egypt where the price of bread is exponentially higher by the day. I don't know. I think this is it's an interesting question. I think that there's a kind of return to playing both sides in the Middle East and North Africa and going down into sub-Saharan Africa, the kind of thing that we saw during the Cold War, like, except that there's nobody who's one client or another. It's not quite as organized yet. So you can't be on Russia's team or be on America's team.
And clearly the savviest thing is to play both sides against each other.
And clearly that's what people are doing. And there's a third player, to come back to China, which has, spent the last 20 years with its Belt and Road Initiative, influencing Africa, providing infrastructure loans, which then Chinese companies go out and they build. And all of this fluidity is there. I think that I'm going to give Mr. Guterres, the head of the UN, some credit for being a genuine humanitarian and saying, look...
Because it's often quite a lousy job being UN Secretary General, isn't it?
It's a thankless job, and the UN has been absent in terms of the peacekeeping or crisis dealing in the war between Russia and Ukraine. But this is a win, I mean, if it holds, because it does allow all of this food stuff, and it's not just wheat, I mean, it's the soy, the sunflower oil. I mean, I've been in Ukraine. I mean, it's sunflowers forever, and the sunflower, all of this is necessary for cooking in places like Africa. And so, but again, the proof is in the pudding, because the awkwardness of, yes, it has to be guided out past the mines that Ukraine has laid to protect itself from a Russian invasion of its southern ports. And then it has to be escorted. And every step of the way, there's the potential for flashpoints and
or mistakes, accidents, whatever they may be. Just last point, Ashes. I asked the question, we're in danger of not answering. Why did Erdogan keep Putin waiting for almost a minute? And in these heavily choreographed diplomatic public events, it is quite humiliating.
Yes, I think this is part of the blow hot, blow cold relationship. And I think he also realizes that Putin needs this meeting. He needs to be seen in this international arena with the Iranian leader and with me and so on. So yes, I know he's a very shrewd player. I'm not very sure whether he's great for the world, but he's very much there.
Ashit Ray, Steve Richards, Michael Goldfarb, as you all are. Thank you very much. Thank you for your company. More from Dateline, same time next week. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.